Howdy, partner, and welcome to Rising. We've got another excellent show for you all today as we continue our coverage of the Democratic National Convention. I was up late waiting for the Obamas to finally speak, and eventually they did.
Well, thanks, partner. Let's get into the news.
you like that? All right, go ahead. Tell us.
I did. Well, the Obamas absolutely electrified the crowd and Robby, who was staying up late during the second night of the DNC in Chicago. The former First Lady exuded hope for Harris and Walz, while also warning of the battle ahead against former President Trump. Let's watch.
For years, Donald Trump did everything in his power to try to make people fear us. See, his limited, narrow view of the world made him feel threatened by the existence of two hardworking, highly educated, successful people who happen to be black. I want to know, who's going to tell him that the job he's currently seeking might just be one of those black jobs?
Michelle Obama also warned voters not to get in their own way. Take a listen.
So, folks, we cannot be our own worst enemies. No. See, because the minute something goes wrong, the minute a lie takes hold, folks, we cannot start wringing our hands. We cannot get a Goldilocks complex about whether everything is just right. And we cannot indulge our anxieties about whether this country will elect someone like Kamala instead of doing everything we can to get someone like Kamala elected.
She also pleaded with voters to take action.
Don't just sit around and complain. Do something. So, if they lie about her, and they will, we've got to do something. If we see a bad poll, and we will, we got to put down that phone and do something.
Former President Barack Obama also delivered a fiery speech. Take a listen.
Here's a 78-year-old billionaire who has not stopped whining about his problems since he rode down his golden escalator 9 years ago. It has been a constant stream of gripes and grievances that's actually been getting worse now that he's afraid of losing to Kamala. There's the childish nicknames, the crazy conspiracy theories, this weird obsession with crowd sizes.
As expected, the media was floored by their speeches. Here's CNN's Van Jones reacting.
This was a masterful act of leadership. It was a sacred task. They took it on well. It was like an oasis. I didn't realize I had been in a spiritual desert until they created that oasis on that stage, and they did a beautiful job tonight.
But even Fox News' Brent Bears praised the Obamas. Let's watch.
Barack Obama essentially showing this crowd why he is still such a star inside the Democratic Party, but perhaps overshadowed by his wife, the former First Lady Michelle Obama, who gave an amazing speech that got this crowd on their feet.
Listen, they gave a good speech. Oasis? I don't know what Van Jones is taking.
He needs a cold
He's
shower.
been deep in his emotions on air. I don't know what's going on there. I wouldn't say Oasis, but they were good speeches, Robby.
They were good speeches. They are known for giving good speeches. Barack Obama is a once-in-a-generation political talent in terms of his rhetorical gifts, his ability to motivate a crowd. It is a little bit about substance, though, I will say, and I actually think Barack Obama did a better job of this than Michelle, although I think almost Michelle got more of the positive attention in terms of the media coverage. But one thing Barack Obama said while he was up there, I'm going to quote from this, from his transcript of his remarks. He said, "To make progress on the things we care about, the things that really affect people's lives, we need to remember that we've all got our blind spots and contradictions and prejudices, and if we want to win over over those who aren't yet ready to support our candidates. We need to listen to their concerns and maybe learn something in the process. After all, if a parent or grandparent occasionally says something that makes us cringe, we don't automatically assume they're bad people. We recognize that the world's moving fast. They need time and encouragement to catch up. Our fellow citizens deserve the same grace. We hope they'll extend to us. That's how we can build a true Democratic majority, one that can get things done. And these are not unusual remarks from Barack Obama. He's actually, he's spoken at college campuses and complained about cancel culture and complained about some tactics of the very far left that want to cancel everybody and shut people down and call everybody racist. He makes that critique, and it's why he was so, it's part of the reason for why he was so effective and well liked and was able to recruit or retain in the Democratic coalition working class white people that Donald Trump has made a bid for, older working class white people. So I think it was a good speech and a reminder of, you know, why he won twice, why he was a very effective political figure. And he did a good job.
Yeah, I saw an ex-user say the way he spoke so eloquently about people being able to marry whoever they want makes you forget almost that he opposed gay marriage in 2008.
Yeah, he was not at all the far left. He was a moderate figure in many ways in terms of the policies he supported at the time.
Yeah, I mean, to see him take a hit at Donald Trump for being a billionaire and airing his own grievances, it's interesting coming from a guy who hired people to his cabinet from Goldman Sachs. And so I think that, yes, Obama, great speaker. Some of what he said, I was just kind of like, well, in 2008, you opposed gay marriage. So, like, it's very weird to do this kind of, we're so progressive now. He ran on that in 2008, and he disappointed a lot of the people who worked on his campaign. But I think the Democratic Party is in a very different place. And there's this debate going on as to, are they actually all in on these progressive values now? Whereas you have other people who are more establishment not saying AOC, got some of her vision as a part of the party platform, but rather that the Democrats have now co-opted AOC. And so I think we don't know what's real until and unless Kamala Harris wins and we get to see what they do.
Similarly, I thought it was interesting. Michelle Obama had a line about the affirmative action of generational wealth, as if Barack Obama was not a candidate of wealthy interests and business interests and corporate interests. Think of all the bailouts and financial transactions to benefit corporations that actually the left was very dissatisfied with during the Obama presidency. How is that not worse than the retention of wealth over generations, to actually direct wealth, the taxpayers' wealth, to large corporate interests, as Barack Obama was in favor of doing? So I found that interesting. You're right about the focus on billionaires, good or bad, was something that came up because Bernie Sanders gave his speech, obviously, about billionaires being bad, billionaires as a policy failure, and then he's immediately followed by J.B. Pritzker, governor of Illinois, who is a billionaire and bragged about being a billionaire following the Bernie's remarks. And then I saw CNN covering this, and they I swear to God, was it CNN or MSNBC? I think it was CNN. Oh, I find my tweet about it. I swear to God, no, it was MSNBC, excuse me, saying that
diversity.
This is an example of the diversity in our party, that we have someone who doesn't like billionaires, and we do have a billionaire. And it was a really funny line. I can't remember which MSNBC talking head on their little panel said it. The other people just, even though it was a really cringe line, just let them say that and then moved on.
Yeah, it's a big tent these days.
Yeah.
I think Michelle Obama saying, you can't have your Goldilocks of what you want. Yeah, we're not deciding the hottest porridge, the coolest porridge, or the one perfectly in the middle. We're just going to have it all. And that's going to be the Democratic Party now. We're going to have billionaires bragging about their wealth and how Donald Trump doesn't have enough, and Bernie Sanders criticizing billionaires' influence over our politics directly before. Yeah. The contrast should feel like whiplash, but these days it just feels like that's what the Democratic Party is, I guess. And it is a blue moon. I've been told by our makeup artist in the studio that last night was a blue moon. And I was getting text messages like, am I okay with the Democratic ticket this time around, from people who are usually to the left of it? And it's because it happens once in a blue moon, which was literally last night, which is technically 2 full moons in 1 month.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Interesting.
We're having 4 this year.
4 moons at one.
4 blue moons.
Oh, I get it. Oh, in the schedule.
So 4 months where
Sure.
there's 2 full moons. So we're going to expect lots of surprises,
So
Robbie.
you think that's exerting some astrological influence on this? I keep getting paired with on this show people who are all into this kind of thing, and every single host I've had sitting in that chair has been filling me in on insights we can glean from the alignments of the planets.
I respect theories based on years of collected data.
Sure. I'm not knocking it at all. I need help to explain what has gone wrong, man.
Robbie's been so broken, he's open to astrology.
I will take knowledge wherever knowledge can be found. All right, we'll have more analysis of the DNC coming up on Rising, also some other topics to get into. Stay with us. Well, we do have some big news out of the Robert F. Kennedy Jr. campaign, with his running mate, Nicole Shanahan, suggesting that dropping out and joining forces with Donald Trump is a possibility for the ticket. Let's listen to what she had to say in a recent interview.
There's 2 options that we're looking at, and one is staying in, forming that new party, but we run the risk of a Kamala Harris and Walz presidency, because we draw votes from Trump, or we draw somehow more votes from Trump, or we walk away right now and join forces with Donald Trump, and we walk away from that and we explain to our base why we're making this decision.
Kennedy responded to Shanahan's statement yesterday, writing on X, "As always, I am willing to talk with the leaders of any political party to further the goals I have served for 40 years in my career and in this campaign. These are reversing the chronic disease epidemic, ending the war machine, cleaning corporate influence out of government and toxic pollution out of the environment, protecting freedom of speech, and ending politicization of enforcement agencies."
Earlier in the interview, Shanahan said, "I did not put in tens of millions of dollars to be a spoiler candidate. We don't want to be a spoiler." Hours later, Donald Trump told CNN he'd consider a role for RFK in his administration if he were elected as president in November. Quote, "I like him and I respect him. He's a brilliant guy. He's a very smart guy. I've known him for a long time. I didn't know he was thinking about getting out, but if he is, certainly I'd be open to it." Just pretending that leaked phone call never happened. Now, Shanahan has a lot of money. She was married to Sergey Brin, who is a founder of Google. She also has her own startup, but most of her money comes from that divorce in 2023.
Yes. So this is some interesting news. I think maybe we are finally dispensing with this notion that RFK Jr. was disproportionately hurting Biden or Harris by being in the race. A sort of panic that the mainstream media and so many Democratic Party leaders had for so long, and has resulted in efforts by Democrats to get him off the ballot. Successful so far in New York. He's been disqualified there, according to a judge, because of some very insubstantial aspect of the address not being a New York address. Again, he's not running for office specifically in New York, where that might matter. He's running to be on the ballot in that state, as he should be in all other states. But there had been reported that the Democratic Party, that the Biden campaign had a specific task force set on handling RFK Jr., doing everything they can to keep him off the ballot. I think the thinking of the RFK Jr. people now is that they disproportionately, they draw some votes from both sides, and they draw votes from independents who wouldn't be voting for anyone, but that more so than taking votes from Biden, they've taken votes from Trump. So it's interesting to hear them grappling with that and saying that it sounds like they would rather, obviously they want to win, but they would rather Trump win than Harris, is what it sounds like. And so
from Shanahan.
Right, that's what she's saying, that their support might be possible if some concessions were made. And look, I don't blame them, given our system being so stacked against independent and third-party candidates. It's a winner-take-all system where even if you get 5% of the vote, if you get 5% of the vote in Europe, in many European countries, then you get 5% of the representation in the government. You have some influence. Here, unless you get 51%, you're not getting anything. Unless you win the Electoral College, you're not getting anything. So I will never blame third-party and independent candidates for trying to use the support they do have to exert some kind of influence over the likely winners, because that's the only way you can translate your votes into some kind of power, some kind of ability to affect the message you're running on. So I don't blame them for considering this. I certainly think it's better for independent and third-party movements if they stick it out and they stay, in the race, and they should not cash that in on a threadbare promise to have some kind of influence in an administration. But it's interesting to hear them contemplating it. That's my view.
Yeah, I think RFK Jr.'s conversations with the Kamala Harris campaign that we reported on recently, and they pretty much shut him down. The Harris campaign was like, no, we're not interested in talking to you. And knowing he already had an offer on the table pretty much from Donald Trump that it was an option to drop out and endorse and potentially join the Trump campaign, he was like, Bobby, this is going to be so big for you. It's clear Trump was open to it. And so RFK Jr. pursued Kamala Harris's campaign instead. So that indicates to me that while they're an independent campaign, RFK Jr. might rather serve in a Kamala Harris administration or somehow believe she has a better shot at winning. But Shanahan, I feel like, is just Karening the ticket. She's like, I paid millions of dollars not to spoil Donald Trump, but at the end of the day, RFK Jr. dropping out and endorsing someone isn't really her decision right now. She can't be like, I paid money for this, so I get to decide who we drop out and endorse.
We should be clear that the reporting that he had tried to have a conversation with Kamala Harris, I believe RFK Jr. put out a statement denying that was the case. I don't think he said, and he's correct, that a RFK Jr. Democrat is not at all welcome in today's Democratic Party. It just isn't, given the trajectory of the party in believing the elite consensus on science and requirements for COVID and mandates and all that kind of thing. He wouldn't be welcome there. He should also not just join the Trump campaign without an ironclad commitment to be able to exert some influence over policies where they would be aligned. Whether that's a cabinet position or something else, I don't know. He has a couple areas of interest where he aligns with where Republicans want to be, again, in terms of the COVID mandates, maybe the weaponization of the federal government, maybe some free speech-related issues. It would not be on, energy regulation is not an area where he does align with the Republicans on. He aligns much more closely with Democrats on that. So we'll see. But it's interesting that, this is a razor-thin margin right now between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. It is so close. I actually saw some reporting from Forbes that the betting markets had Trump. Some betting markets have Trump up again slightly over Kamala Harris. They think, based on this news, that RFK Jr. might get out because it's going to be so close. Because
I've seen a lot of the national polls, and we know the swing state polls matter far more because of the Electoral College, but showing Kamala Harris leads by more when RFK Jr. is taken out of the race. But I think what people are really looking at is how this will factor into swing states where things are much closer.
Yeah, and things are close. You got to remember that the polls last time around for Biden versus Trump in 2020, they had Biden leading the whole time. They had Biden leading quite substantially at various points. He was up as many as 7 points ahead in national polling. And then, and even in some of the swing states, and then the final, in the swing states, it was close. Biden won by 40,000 votes across the three main states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. So even if the the fear for Democrats is that even if the polls show Kamala Harris up by that much, well, they have been off in favor of Democrats in recent cycles. So that's why Trump is by no means out of it, and depending on how you're counting things, might be narrowly ahead, he might be narrowly behind. It is very close, which is why the RFK Jr. factor does matter. But as I always say, I don't think the two major parties are owed anyone's votes. And if Trump loses narrowly because of RFK Jr., that's fine by me. If Harris loses narrowly because of RFK Jr., that's fine by me. They could win his voters by speaking to the issues that he is representing that resonate with Americans, instead of doing kind of backroom dealings to neutralize him, or the very dirty tactics that Democrats have been doing to literally keep him off the ballot at a time where they say democracy is at stake in a psychological and legal and philosophical sense, the dirty tricks they're pulling.
Yeah, this could really shift things, but we'll continue to follow this as always. More Rising after this. Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders called for a ceasefire in Gaza when he spoke at the DNC last night. Let's watch.
We must summon the courage to stand up to wealth and power and deliver justice for people at home and abroad. Abroad. We must end this horrific war in Gaza. Bring home the hostages and demand an immediate ceasefire. Let us elect Kamala Harris as our president, and let us go forward to create the nation we know we can become.
Multiple pro-Palestinian protesters were arrested on the Democratic National Convention's second day. Groups led demonstrators through the streets of Chicago and began clashing with police near the Israeli consulate. So they are continuing to be active. The issue of Gaza has now come up a couple times at the convention, with Bernie Sanders talking about it there. A few others have mentioned it as well. Do you think this is going to, mollify the sort of people in the streets who are, chanting genocide Joe, and in some cases killer Kamala? It seems to me she's been a little bit let off by the progressives, or forgiven or given some leeway to construct a policy or say something differently about them, even though she's been part of the same administration that has done all of the, according to the left, genocidal support for what Israeli is doing. She's been part of that. She hasn't really signaled any difference from it. She did, call for a ceasefire at one point, say what was going on over there was bad. But I don't know. Is it at all satisfactory for the protesters at this point?
Yeah, I will say there's definitely a group of protesters who are present who are demonstrating because of how the current administration has handled this, and they don't really care what they say at the DNC. They care about action, and they're protesting. It's petition of government for redress of grievances. They have a lot of grievances. There are people who are lifelong Democrats who have had over 100 family members killed because of what Israel has done with the support of the United States. And so will they stop if Kamala Harris says, I really want a ceasefire, I'm open to an arms embargo? No, because what they're protesting is what Joe Biden has done, and what they're protesting is what the administration is continuing to do. I think that because they're at the table right now, and they've supposedly, according to Blinken, arrived at some kind of deal, that's good, but Kamala Harris has signaled she's not really open to having any restrictions on aid to Israel through one of her aides that was speaking to a group of donors. That happened yesterday. And so we do see her changing her tune a little bit at these rallies. Initially, she was interrupted, and she said, I'm speaking. At the very next rally, she was interrupted again by protesters, and she reacted differently. She did exactly what people critical of her initial reaction wanted her to do, which was to take a moment and stop and say, no, okay, let's pause and address what these people are talking about. We need a ceasefire in Gaza. We also saw Raphael Warnock speaking, refer to the Palestinians as a people for the first time at the convention, and say that we need to do right by, the civilians in Israel and the civilians in Gaza, who are roped up into this war because of, the leaders of the state of Israel and their constant assault on Gaza. So I think things are shifting, but not enough that they're not going to protest for the rest of the DNC.
We still can't get around the fundamental problem, the fundamental disconnect. You know, people like Bernie Sanders saying we need a ceasefire now. You know, in theory, I agree. Obviously, I don't want the violence or the fighting or the killing to continue. I think the number of dead, innocent Palestinians is stunning and bad, and I don't really want to support. Actually, I don't want to give American dollars to any other countries, you know, foreign military issues. I just don't see why they should not be responsible for paying it. I don't know why it falls on Americans. But the fundamental problem is Israel has taken the position that Hamas is an illegitimate terrorist organization that has vowed to destroy Israel and that they will not be safe until its senior leadership surrenders, is killed, is defeated, is exiled, whatever. And so their position is there can't really be a ceasefire between a group that they want destroyed utterly, and they're willing to continue fighting and killing and destroying Gaza in order to get that. And Hamas is not willing to surrender or step aside or let the Palestinians pick different leaderships. Obviously, they're a theocratic, totalitarian terrorist organization. And so I don't see how a ceasefire is actually possible given those red lines, that Israel says no Hamas and Hamas isn't willing to step aside. So how can there be a ceasefire if that's the way it is?
Yeah, and this idea that it's about the release of the hostages is crazy. The families of hostage members in Israel are very unhappy with Netanyahu because a lot of his actions, deciding to carpet bomb Gaza, has killed a lot of the hostages. There was the release of 6 bodies of hostages, 5 of which the IDF knew were dead. You know, they were exchanged. And you have thousands of Palestinians held by the Israelis that are taken as prisoners of war. That's never a part of the negotiations. Whenever people talk about bringing the hostages home, they refer to the hostages taken by Hamas, ignoring how many have been taken by Israel. And now we have on footage the rape and abuse of Palestinians in Israel. And you have the congressional body, the parliamentary body of Israel, debating whether or not it is okay for the IDF to rape soldiers, something that is against human rights law. And so, yes, I don't think it makes sense to expect Netanyahu to sign on to a ceasefire when he said he does not intend, no matter who the government is, Hamas or not, the Palestinians to have an independent government post-war, denying them their right to self-actualization and self-government. And so the United States really needs to use their position of power to stop giving them weapons and say what you're doing is not okay, because on so many levels and by so many metrics, it's clearly not.
Well, I mean, I'm fine with us not giving them any more military aid because I don't think American tax dollars should be spent in that way, really independent of how Israel is using it. But I also don't think the American government should use our influence to force the Israeli government to put up with a terrorist organization on its borders. I'm not sure we would put up with that. You said it's that they're not willing to accept anyone being in control of the Gaza Strip. I think their position is it can't be a terrorist organization. They have to have some veto power over who it is, because if it's like Hamas, they're not willing to accept that.
Yeah, we're in a tough position because the occupation on Gaza, which is what put the Israeli border over the Palestinian border, is something that the United States funded and supported. So at what point do we pull out now? And I think that's what's being negotiated now, is what the terms will be, and that's going to be very difficult. We're going to continue to follow it, but of course, interesting to see what's going on around the DNC. More rising after this.
I remember those waiting for the phone calls. You'd go through the treatments. I would have my neighbor come over to have to give shots to my wife and things like that. And the phone would ring, and you would just hope so highly that it would be good news. And then when you found out the treatments didn't work, it was a darkness that could blot out the sun.
That was Kamala Harris's running mate, Tim Walz, sharing how he and his wife, Gwen, sought fertility treatments when trying to have children, a narrative that has become central to him on the trail. Fortunately, it's not exactly true. In a profile in Glamour magazine published earlier this week, Minnesota First Lady Gwen, his wife, shared more details about the family's fertility story, clarifying that they did not use in vitro fertilization, but rather IUI, or intrauterine insemination, which is a different process from IVF. It does not involve implicating embryos the way that IVF does.
J.D. Vance immediately started targeting Walz, accusing him of lying. He took to X, writing, quote, "Today it came out that Tim Walz had lied about having a family via IVF. Who lies about something like that?" The Harris-Walz spokesperson issued a statement explaining the governor was, quote, "using only commonly understood shorthand for fertility treatment." IVF was thrust into the spotlight after the Alabama Supreme Court ruled embryos should be treated like children, rendering IVF a possible criminal offense. So,
yes, IVF, but not IUI. So the difference is important, especially to someone who went through it. He said on MSNBC last month, "Thank God for IVF. My wife and I have 2 beautiful children." Again, I think this is another clear case, like the military case, where he implied or suggested something contrary to what actually is. And this is becoming a little bit of a pattern with him. They are very different procedures from the standpoint of a Christian or socially conservative morality. People who object to IVF don't object to IUI because it doesn't involve the creation or destruction of embryos. So there are Christian conservative people in this country who would object to one but not the other. So conflating them, sure, maybe there are some people who use IVF as shorthand for both things, but if we're talking about policy, it's very different, and he should know that from having gone through it. And he absolutely allowed people to believe that, again, his story specifically concerns IVF. My children wouldn't exist if not for this thing that Republicans are trying to ban, when really they did a different procedure. Again, it's not the end of the world, but he ought to be a little bit more careful in the ways he says things. There is now a clear pattern of him exaggerating, if not outright lying or misleading the public and the media, and they're covering for it. There's no one hounding him over these kinds of misstatements in the mainstream media, as far as I can tell. It's all excuses for him.
Yeah, I don't think it's a big difference whether or not he had an embryo outside of his wife's body that was fertilized, or if they conducted the procedure through, taking the sperm and injecting it into the eggs within the uterus. They still use this fertility technology that colloquially people call IVF.
Well, you might not think it's a big difference, but the millions of conservative
yes,
people
and
in the country do think it is.
Ridiculous. They find it a big difference as well, that the embryo is outside of the body, and therefore it's a bigger deal, because frequently, even through natural physical conception via sex, you have embryos or eggs that are fertilized that don't attach to the uterine wall. Is that woman responsible for murder because the natural process of the embryo implanting on her uterine wall doesn't go right? That's the same thing.
The problem, and again, I'm just explaining how socially conservative people feel about this. Their problem, I'm not speaking from my own personal attitude, but the way Christian conservative people feel is that IVF involves the creation, fertilization of additional embryos that are then that are left over and discarded, and nothing is done with them. And their view is that is potential life, and that part of it is wrong.
And that's what I'm saying, is that happens naturally all the time. You can have someone's sperm inside of you, and it fertilizes an egg that does not implant. That is an embryo that ends up dying. Is that woman responsible for murder for that embryo not implanting in her uterus? That happens all the time.
Yeah, again, I'm not.
I think it's so. That's why I think it's ridiculous that that's even like a view that people have, because it seems to be one that's not based on science or reality. And so these people that are, assessing Walz's military record after 24 years of service, that he retires 4 years later than what is standard, that he did deploy in support of the war in Afghanistan, which is how he said it several times, which is very precise language for a veteran to use. And because he made a point about gun control and mentioned guns, it seems like J.D. Vance has nothing to
carried in war. I mean,
he carried to war. He deployed in support of the war in Afghanistan, which is how he himself put it. I've read many op-eds by veterans who talk about this and say Walz has always been very precise about this, and they think it's petty of someone like J.D. Vance, who is essentially in the role of being a war reporter when he deployed. And he's saying, oh, well, I served our country during Afghanistan. He took photographs and wrote articles. That is what he did. Walz was of a much higher position and was actually supporting the strategy of the war. He wasn't just reporting on it like
petty.
Vance.
Okay, excuse me. That's equally petty. Neither of them were in combat, and that's relevant.
I think it's relevant to point out that J.D. Vance was taking pictures and reporting on the war while Tim Walz's position.
Is that not a commendable
No,
job.
thank you for your service, JD Vance.
We're
but
journalists
let's be
here.
very real. That is a very different contribution in terms of what the substantiality of the contributions were than Tim Walz, who's in a very high-ranking position, was contributing actually to strategy.
Okay, he still should not have made it sound like he was in combat. And if people continue to find it suspect that he got out right before his unit was going to be deployed to Iraq, they can, draw whatever conclusion about that they want. I think he has a clear pattern of we haven't even, really talked about the drunk driving allegation against him yet. It seems like that was totally misrepresented as well, that he claimed it's been sort of hushed up, barely dealt with by the media, that he was pulled over for drunk driving many, many, many years ago, and he claimed it was having to do with his eyesight. It absolutely was not. It had to do with drunkenness.
Yeah, what happened there was he was young, and I believe in his 20s. He was pulled over.
Okay, fine.
He was found to have had a few beers, very common occurrence in the Midwest. He told the cop that he was deaf and tried to get off on that. But following that, he got sober, and that was the event in his life that motivated him to get sober. And so, yeah, of course the right's not going to attack him on that, because that's an endearing story and one many people can relate to with family members who are alcoholics in the U.S. So it feels like J.D. Vance has nothing really to campaign against and is splitting hairs instead. And I think it makes J.D. Vance look even more unlikable. I think this is why he just keeps going down in the favorability ratings. His attacks aren't landing, and they're making him look worse. The data supports that.
I don't know that they're not landing. I mean, you can make the argument, I guess, that they're not. I don't know that they're not landing. Conservative media has been all over these claims by these aspects of Tim Walz's identity. They're doing the work the mainstream media absolutely refuses to do, properly vetting this candidate. I don't know. I think given the policy debate around IVF particularly, not being more precise in your language here was, I guess not an unforgivable sin, but an error, and one he should correct when he talks about this in the future. These are different things. Religious people want to ban one but not the other generally for deeply and sincerely held reasons. You don't have to agree with those reasons. I know you don't. I'm not saying that I necessarily do, but that is how millions of people feel, and it's a public policy matter that's going to come up, and he was involved in it and should represent his history related to it correctly.
I think when many people are struggling to afford groceries and one party's putting forth a plan to end price gouging and talking about that, and J.D. Vance is obsessing over the technical language Walz uses, I think it signals to the American people, who has the interests of regular working Americans at heart and who just wants to campaign for power, considering J.D. Vance has changed all of his positions since he was a student at Yale Law School. He just is a fraud and a phony to me, and I'm just sick of him being in the media. I can't wait till J.D. Vance loses this election and Trump blames it all on him and we never have to hear about him again.
I feel that way about Tim Walz, while also not being, you're a fan of Tim Walz and you hate J.D. Vance. I'm not particularly a fan of J.D. Vance, but I also do not like Tim Walz. I do not want to see his policies become part of the federal government. I absolutely do not want to see the price gouging thing go into effect that is going to result in shortages as they have every other time they were tried, including in America under the Nixon presidency. There's exhaustive economic literature against doing price gouging controls, price controls, but
that's not the same thing. Price controls and price gouging laws are different. There's price gouging laws in 40 states today.
Of price controls.
There's price gouging laws in 40 states today, including conservative states.
We should not have them.
But they haven't created shortages.
Of course they have.
No, they haven't.
They always
price
do.
Gouging laws in the 40 states we have, no, they have not.
They always do, yes.
No.
Yes.
Just give an example of one state with price gouging laws in the United States where shortages have been created, Robby.
If we didn't have those laws, you would have more supply of those goods. It's just basic economics.
What evidence do you have of that claim, Robby?
Basic economics 101.
That's
when
not
you
evidence.
when you discourage people, when you stop people from offering a service at the price they want to offer it for, you're going to get less of that thing.
No. So an example would be,
you just are.
No, an example of this would be in hurricanes. There were issues in southern states like Texas and Florida and Louisiana where companies, corner stores and the like, were charging.
Usually not big corporations, by the way. I know you love to rail against corporations, but the people who spike their prices in emergencies are the local people, not the corporations.
Yes, but what we're dealing with during the pandemic is big corporations. But in Texas, they made laws that you can't charge $10 for a water bottle in a time of crisis. That did not create shortages. What creates shortages
Yes, it does.
is water being too expensive for people to afford it. That is why we need price gouging
are
laws.
are not allowed to sell it at what the market is willing to pay for it. They just hoard it. They don't sell it.
That's not true. There's
Yes,
no
it is.
examples of that happening in any of these states after a hurricane.
Absolutely true. Well, we'll have to look at that more closely. More Rising right after this. The Biden administration's efforts to compel schools across the country to accept and enforce what conservatives say are progressive notions of gender, well, that took a massive loss at the Supreme Court recently. Now, the administration had made an emergency request to enforce the Education Department's new protocols, which might have required, for instance, schools to let biological males use female locker rooms if they identify that way. This is after a lower court had ruled against the department. Now, these rules, released in April, clarified that Title IX's ban on sex discrimination in schools also covered discrimination based on gender identity, sexual orientation, and pregnancy or related conditions. Went into effect on August 1st, marking the first time the law stated the discrimination based on sex includes conduct related to a person's gender identity. Now, dozens of attorneys general all over the country sued over the rule, arguing that it would conflict with some of their state laws that block transgender students from participating in women's sports, for instance. Now, swimmer Riley Gaines, who's been outspoken on trans athletes' discourse, celebrated the decision on her podcast, Gaines for Girls, quoting, she said, quote, "Not all Supreme Court justices know what a woman is, but today enough did, and that's a win worth celebrating. This is a win for women, free speech, the rule of law, and common sense onward." So it's a little bit technical what happened. Each new administration keeps releasing rules related to, so Title IX is a federal law that prohibits sex-based discrimination in education. It was originally intended to make sure that if there's a male sports team club at the school and there's comparative interest in there being a female one, school has to have a female one as well. You can't have male versus female discrimination. That started getting read in aggressive and new, expansive ways during the Obama administration, compelling a lot of speech and due process-related protocols on university campuses with sexual misconduct. They decided that sexual misconduct was a component of sex-based discrimination, and there were a lot of policies related to that I thought were quite suspect. Now the Biden administration had said that gender identity is a component of sex discrimination, and so under the existing law, a law that was written 50 years ago, it is already illegal to deny to, for instance, transgender students maybe accommodations based under this law. Now, the attorneys general of a bunch of states said, well, wait, our state has a law, a rule to stop, for instance, trans people's participation in spaces that we think should be reserved for biological women. And so we're not going to follow this rule. So there was a need for the court to weigh in. And a lower court had stopped the enforcement of the Title IX rules. Biden appealed to the Supreme Court to undo that stoppage. And the Supreme Court said, no, it has to be halted while the issue is adjudicated. So these rules are not in effect. Now, I would say that I don't think Title IX covers these instances at all. This is a 50-year-old law. If you want to, Congress could make a new law saying that trans students ought to be protected in this way. It could be responsive to public demand. I always think it's better, given the discomfort some people will have with having trans people in a woman-only space. Can't there be additional accommodations? I think it'd be better and result in less harassment all the way around in schools to just have more privacy in the locker rooms, the bathrooms, all those kinds of things. You could pass a law, but they're trying to do under the existing law something that is not meant at all to cover this, to read into these protections, and I think that was wrong.
Yeah, the Educational Amendments of 1972 is the piece of legislation where Title IX is a part of, and it pertains to discrimination in education altogether. The college that I went to for undergraduate studies, Walz College, is one of those schools where, when colleges were initially founded in the United States, women were not deemed people who should go to college at all, really. But a lot of the Ivy Leagues established these women's colleges. At Brown, we had Pembroke way back in the day, where women would go and learn about literature and how to become interesting wives, basically. At Cornell, it was Wells College, and it never joined in with the main university. It stayed independent. It was all women till 2005. But that difference in course structure was pretty common in education. My mom, I remember, would take classes in, she made clogs in a woodworking class, and she learned how to take care of the home, whereas guys got to take, I don't know, more interesting mechanics classes or things of that nature. And so a big part of this was to sort of equalize that. And so does it make sense that Title IX applies only to sports now? Yeah, because the other facets of our education system are pretty equal. Men and women are in the same classrooms in most public schools and universities. And so I think it's good that this exists. Does it extend to regulating the bathrooms and locker rooms? I think, for Tennessee and Louisiana and all of these states that have passed these laws around who can use what bathroom, I think those laws at all are an infringement on privacy. The idea that there's some right or entitlement of the state to make laws segregating bathrooms based on gender, it's a little bit weird. And so I don't really know how I feel about it. I think that it feels like an infringement on privacy to even ask kids what their gender is. It's a lot easier to say, you're a woman, you dress like a woman, you identify as a woman, use the women's bathroom. But to make laws to try and control where people go because some girls in locker rooms grow up in households where they're told transgender people are weird and ungodly, it just feels like ridiculous to me.
I would mostly just let the schools work out whatever policy they think is best. But I mean, in terms of the sports team, look, if you're biologically male and start presenting as a female, start wearing female clothing, and your gender identity is female, again, I don't have any problem with that, but you can't be on the girls' basketball team now if you've just suddenly started identifying as a female. I think it would be reasonable to not necessarily say you can compete against biological women. If I think it's fine for a school to have that policy. I think most people would agree with that. And this was the federal government, the Biden administration, was massively redefining a 50-year-old law, Title IX, to say that in that case, I don't know, it was going to be unclear whether you could actually deny a person who had not transitioned, not doing medical transition, but whose gender identity is now female, from being on the women's sports team. Because gender identity was being included under the sex discrimination. And that's where I think it gets
but that's not what
a little
this
bit
case was
tricky.
About.
Yes, that is what this case was
No, this
about.
case was about, it was Tennessee and Louisiana, others joined in the lawsuit, and it was about them calling, any kind of harassment, specifically the creation of a hostile environment,
right,
was a violation to employees and students' right to bodily autonomy. It didn't have much of anything to do with locker rooms or the participation in sports.
Well, it's theoretical, but these laws at the state level are governing exactly that kind of thing, and the view is those laws would be illegal under Title IX. Because it is being applied in this broad way under the new, no one passed, the Biden Democrats did not pass a new law saying now in these circumstances you would have to accommodate trans people in this way. They read into an existing law that has nothing to do with gender identity that they would have to handle it this way, which I think is bad. Again, this goes back to a theme we've covered many times on the show. I think rule by random bureaucrat in the federal government, by education department people, doesn't make a lot of sense. These are progressive ideologues trying to force their worldview on everyone. Congress could make a new law, and it'd be reflexive to public demand, and then you could have input on it. And then, if your member votes for it and you didn't like it, you could hold them accountable. Here we just have the education department willing this into existence and then getting slapped down in court, I think, very deservedly.
This ruling and the Title IX application, didn't have anything to do with the standards that schools make for timelines for transition,
Yes,
how
it does.
long you
That's
have
exactly
to be.
what
That
it's
is
doing.
not what this does.
Yes, it is.
No, this is not.
Yeah.
This has to do specifically with allowing people who identify as female to enter girls' private spaces such as restrooms, locker rooms, and showers, to participate in girls' physical education classes, gym class. And so this idea that Title IX makes it so there's no standards for people transitioning when they can participate in competitive sports, it's not outlawing those standards.
Well, okay, well, let's just stick with the example. Look, there are going to be a lot of parents, maybe you don't feel this way, and that's fine, but there are going to be a lot of parents and some teachers and school professionals and people in red states who don't think that, again, a biologically male person who starts presenting as female or wearing female clothes should be automatically granted access to the women's locker rooms or restrooms or facilities of that nature. You can feel differently, and I would resolve this mostly by leaving it to the school and having people voluntarily associate with whichever is the right environment that fits your values and the way you want your families, who you want people to be around. I'm not going to tell people how to run their school or their life broadly, but this was being told at the federal level that you could not deny that person in that circumstance, that a school that did that could not prevent that. And again, that was not, the Supreme Court has said, no, you can't just decide that. So,
I think the interpretation of the Title IX law is that they cannot create a hostile environment in these schools through laws around gender and sex. So if someone transitions from male to female and a school in Louisiana forces them to be in the male locker room, that does create a hostile environment for that student. And so they need to create an alternative. And I think that's more reasonable than saying the issue is that biological males are trying to enter women's locker rooms. As a woman who's dealt with harassment from men my entire life, I am not at all worried about transgender women being the people who are perpetrating violence. And it's very rich to see a lot of conservative guys on social media who are oftentimes perpetrators of harassment against women suddenly realizing that men are a problem when they talk about biological males going into women's restrooms, not realizing that women who experience harassment are not getting harassed by transgender women. And so to me, it just feels misplaced, and it feels like it's coming from people who think being transgender is weird and not really thinking about the issue as it exists in the schools.
let us know what you think about this. More Rising in just a minute. It's looking more and more likely that the Trump administration might have a spot for Elon Musk if he gets elected in November. During a recent interview with a Reuters journalist, Trump was asked if he would name Musk to an advisory role or a cabinet position. Let's watch.
Would you consider having Elon Musk have a role in the cabinet, advisory position?
I would. He's very smart. I had a great talk with him the other day. As you know, it went on for 2.5 hours almost, and perhaps you listened, but he's a very smart guy. I certainly would. If he would do it, I certainly would. He's a brilliant guy.
Trump also went on to say this about electric vehicles.
I am a big fan of electric. I'm a big fan of Elon and other people involved in the electric car. I think an electric car is great. But it's somewhat limited because of the cost. The cost is higher because of the availability in terms of the material. They're going to have to be made largely in China. They're going to be made in China. And it's also, it doesn't go far enough. You've got to have something that can go where you don't have to recharge 4 times if you want to take a trip down to Washington, D.C., which we are also going to fix and make safe, by the way.
But would you rescind the EV tax credit if you could?
Well, we're looking at that. That's a big thing. But, tax credits and tax incentives are not generally a very good thing.
Trump added that he was not making any final decisions on it.
Meanwhile, Elon Musk, who endorsed Trump last month, responded to Trump on X, writing, quote, "I am willing to serve." And as a reminder, during their lengthy convo last week, Musk said he'd be happy to serve on a possible government efficiency commission if Trump is elected, to which Trump responded, "I'd love it."
In other EV news, Ford announced today it would pull back on its electric vehicle push. The automaker said it would reduce the amount of money it plans to spend on EVs, delaying the introduction of a new large electric pickup truck until 2027, and scrap an electric sport utility vehicle. Ford's chief financial officer said in a conference call, quote, "The competitive nature of the market is changing globally, and that means these vehicles need to be profitable, and if not, we will pivot and adjust and make these tough decisions." For context, last month, Ford reported that its electric vehicle division had lost $2.5 billion in the first half of the year overall. The company made $3.2 billion. I actually think Donald Trump put it absolutely correct when he said that electric vehicles broadly are a good thing, but they can't be just propped up artificially by tax credits and tax incentives. The industry needs to be able to compete on its own merit, and if it wins out in the market, that's fine. And obviously, there may be a little bit of government investment in terms of getting the charging stations, or at least the permitting requirement, the legal morass of getting through the regulations in order to put up the charging stations. Maybe one area where the government could clear out red tape, but broadly speaking, we can't just have, massive subsidies for Tesla, for Musk, for any one specific firm. It's got to, be a technology that can compete on the marketplace, but it's a good technology. So I agreed with what Trump said there entirely. In terms of, Secretary of Commerce Elon Musk or something. I don't know if that's actually a good use of his time. Every time he gets bogged down, I even feel this way about Twitter, despite liking a lot of not all of them, but some of the changes that have occurred. Certainly the transparency he brought to how the previous moderation decisions were made. I'm glad to have him involved, but he's also trying to colonize Mars and build rockets, and that seems like a more important job for the future of humanity than, as much as I would like him, deciding which government wasteful programs to eliminate. That sounds fine to me. I don't know if Elon it's a good use of Elon's time.
Yeah, the Congressional Budget Office already reviews the efficacy and allocation of government dollars, public spending at the federal level. That position already exists. Bernie Sanders is the chair of the Congressional Budget Office, or the chair of the committee, which is what oversees the Congressional Budget Office, which is really responsible for doing all of this work. He can run for Senate if he wants that job and wants to unseat Bernie Sanders. I don't think that's going to happen. The idea that Donald Trump is going to create redundancy when he claims to not like bureaucracy and create this new position for Elon Musk is ridiculous. But for some reason, all the people that are hypercritical of bureaucracy are like, yeah, put Elon Musk in this role. You guys are just creating additional bureaucracy for a position that already exists and is a democratically elected position.
We're going to have a bureaucrat in charge of eliminating bureaucracy. This is like the old joke from, from the webcomic XKCD. Problem, there are 18 standards. So let's just create one new universal standard. New problem, there are 19 standards.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I think it's interesting to see Ford's progress here, right? Because the Department of Energy was allocating, government money to whatever, electric car manufacturer. A lot of, manufacturers were in the testing stage at this point in history. And Elon Musk lied about how far along they were in the loan, first of all, in production. He also lied about the kind of capital they had backing them. Getting the loan from Daimler, he said, I'm already set up to get this loan from the Department of Energy. Then on the Department of Energy loan he was applying for that he did not have yet, he said, I have this financial commitment from Daimler. And then he got the $465 million loan from the government. Ford seemingly is making faster progress with their production. If they had waited a little bit longer to take that government money, it may have been better allocated to someone like Ford, who can make cars that go for longer and don't need to be charged 4 times to go on a trip across the country to Washington, D.C. or what have you. And so Elon Musk is responsible for government funds potentially being used in a more inefficient manner. And so he shouldn't be appointed to that position.
That's fair enough.
A bone to pick with that guy.
I don't want these funds allocated to Tesla or to Ford. Again, I think they have to compete on their own. Sometimes I feel like the government is trying to sell us electric cars. I don't know, every time they get on TV, Secretary Mayor Pete sounds like a salesman for electric cars. Other Democratic former political officials have also been pitching them. I'm like, okay, that's not your job to be a spokesperson for this technology or this company, but let's if there are regulations that are making it harder to innovate in this sector, let's maybe relax some of those without redirecting vast taxpayer resources to specific firms, whether it be Ford or whether it be Tesla.
Yeah, I think that, it's a part of an effort to reduce carbon emissions so that we don't have the planet overheat and then we have disasters we can't control and the planet becomes uninhabitable. But I have seen that actually cows are the #1 contributor, they believe, to carbon emissions. And many people think, like Tucker Carlson, that they're taking away burgers. We're not allowed to have hamburgers anymore. Seth Watkins, a farmer in southwestern Iowa, who I met many years ago, is farming beef in a carbon neutral way because of how he manages his farm and the landscaping of it. So it's possible for us to change how we do things. A big problem is that agriculture's been taken over by corporations, and there's just so many people contributing to us doing things in a backwards manner at many stages in our economy, and a government that's unwilling to speak to any of those issues.
Again, innovation is the key. When they make the fake burgers taste as good as the real burgers, then people will want to eat the fake burgers, and that's all fine. I don't mind. I think they taste just fine. Although I like flavorless, dull foods in general, so I'm perfectly fine with. I just throw ketchup and mustard on that anyway. I can't even tell the difference. Fine by me. More Rising right after this.
Did Donald Trump break federal law by discouraging Bibi Netanyahu from agreeing to a ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas? PBS's Judy Woodruff said Monday that, quote, "The reporting is that former President Trump is on the phone with the Prime Minister of Israel, urging him not to cut a deal right now because it's believed that would help the Harris campaign." Who knows whether that will come out or not, or come about or not, but I have to think the Harris campaign would like for President Biden to do what presidents do, and that's to work on that one. The New Republic and other progressive media outlets have raised the possibility that by having such a conversation, Trump has violated the Logan Act, which prohibits private citizens from engaging in diplomacy or negotiations with foreign governments on the United States' behalf.
Both Trump and Netanyahu have denied that such a call took place, although they both confirmed that they've spoken otherwise. They're saying that they did not. Trump did not specifically say not to do a ceasefire deal. He said in the past that he told Netanyahu to get it done swiftly, whatever that means. So they're talking about the Logan Act in connection here. I'm very skeptical of that Trump would be found to have done anything illegally here, or that the Logan Act is actually enforceable. It's a fascinating law. So this is a law that goes all the way back to 1799. It has only been there are only 2 cases of people being prosecuted for it ever, both from the 19th century, and neither were convicted. I suspect today's Supreme Court might actually find this law unconstitutional entirely, in that it would violate the free speech, the First Amendment rights of private citizens to speak to the heads of foreign governments. That would be my guess.
That's interesting, because you felt very differently when it was Hunter Biden doing it. Robby, with the Foreign Agents Act, the Logan Act is not so different. It's private citizens having unauthorized negotiations with foreign governments. That's the only difference. The Foreign Agents Act is just that you're talking to people in other countries as a private citizen, acting as a foreign agent.
The foreign registration has been, they have successfully prosecuted people in the past for violating that law. That's not saying that you can't engage in those conversations, just that you have to register it. I don't know. I'm sure you can make an argument, maybe someone has, that that's also a First Amendment violation. This one seems a little bit more robust to me. I mean, they've never actually used this law to prosecute anyone successfully. It's way older than the registration law. And the corruption about Hunter, again, it's not even necessarily that anything illegal was done. It's that the people have the right to know that he was trying and he was engaged in a effort and a scheme to leverage the Biden family name to benefit himself and these corrupt business interests. It's more of a making voters aware. And if public resources, the fact that his father was the vice president and whether policy was impacted because of this connection. It's not, obviously, Hunter Biden has the right to, or should have the right to, make money just because he's Hunter Biden or whatever. I don't care about that. Similarly, this is a very different, I said similarly, but this is not actually all that similar. Donald Trump was the president. He might very well be the president again. We're going to prohibit him. He's not allowed to speak to the leaders of heads of state and explain what he thinks his policy ought to be or what their policy ought to be.
According to the Logan Act, no.
Well, yeah, that's why I say the Logan Act is just obviously unconstitutional then.
Okay, yeah, I think Donald Trump just made a perfect phone call.
We can criminalize Barack Obama's ability to speak to the heads of foreign state. We're just you are barred now, Barack Obama, from speaking.
It's about negotiating over a conflict.
That's speaking, Jessica.
No, you can say, hey, what's up? How are you? Haven't talked to you in a long time. How are the kids? Or you can say, don't cut a ceasefire deal with the U.S. government. Very different conversations. And
if he wrote an op-ed for the Washington Post, Donald Trump did say, let's say he wrote an op-ed for the Washington Post saying Israel should not make a ceasefire deal with Hamas. We think we can criminalize that. We obviously can't.
I mean, he could say.
What if he faxed a copy of it to Netanyahu? Then it becomes illegal? No way. This is just obviously First Amendment violation to me.
It's interesting that no conservatives made that argument about Hunter Biden, but let's get into this. This is not the first time Donald Trump would have done something like this. Donald Trump tends to not want any policy, even if it's something popular among the American people, as a ceasefire deal is. He doesn't want them to pass. Let's not forget.
Then don't vote for him on this basis.
Let's not forget that Mitch McConnell negotiated a bipartisan immigration deal that Mitch McConnell himself credits to Donald Trump crushing in the House and Senate.
And the way you hold.
I'm speaking because as Troy Nehls, a Republican, said, we don't want to do anything that would look good for the Biden administration. That's why they did not pass this deal that was created in part by Mitch McConnell. Donald Trump crushed it. The American people want something done on immigration. This is one of the most popular issues among the American people. Donald Trump simply doesn't want it done because he cares more about the presidency than any of the issues he's running on or the American people. So I think this is a pattern of behavior for Donald Trump and anyone who's considered voting for someone who would put their personal ambitions over what's best for the American people and ask the current government not to get things done because it wouldn't look good for him is not someone who has the best interest of the country at heart.
That is perfectly fine. And the correct remedy for his conduct, if you find it objectionable, yes, is to not vote for him, campaign against him, hold him accountable at the ballot box. But in the progressive, liberal, democratic fantasy land, it's always, we must put him in jail. We must convict him. We must try him. We don't like what he's doing, and thus it must be a criminal violation. They're unwilling to or afraid to confront him in the remedy they have at their disposal. That's working just fine because, it's a close election. It could go either way. If you think Donald Trump will be bad for whatever policies you care about, then you don't vote for him. But it's crazy to me to say that he doesn't have the right to hold conversations with the heads of state. Although this is the position that I know Democrats have taken broadly, that he must be constrained or confined or can't engage in the rights or the participation in the democratic process that they say is at stake fundamentally.
And this is the difference between, I think, a lot of people who are independent thinkers on the left and people who are conservative thinkers. Because Hunter Biden has done something very similar that conservatives are enraged about and the right is enraged about. And they think he's the worst. How could he use his leverage as someone who's the son of the vice president of the United States? Donald Trump is using his leverage as a prominent candidate to, yes, break the law. We have laws for a reason, and I believe no one's above them, even if many
Hunter
people
Biden,
like
by the way,
Donald
is not
Trump.
being prosecuted for any of this alleged influence. You're saying it's similar. There's no one. Hunter Biden faced charges for the gun charge. He's not. The state is not pursuing him for any of these things. So it's not. There's no double standard here. He has been let off for the corruption, the credible accusations of corruption, because there is not an underlying crime to it or not one that's been substantiated.
Right, and they have said that we believe it's possible he violated the Foreign Agents Act, and yes, he was investigated by Congress for what he's done, and yes, they have made recommendations for criminal prosecution of Hunter Biden.
Well,
so it's ridiculous to say that, it's ridiculous that Donald Trump is even being attacked for this, when Hunter Biden's being attacked for this by conservatives
The registration
and the GOP.
thing is that law is aimed for if you're representing a foreign government and lobbying the U.S., whereas it's not analogous to
or
what Donald Trump is
multinational
being
company.
accused.
Burisma's not
a foreign interest. Donald Trump was representing his own interests in having whatever negotiation took place between him and Netanyahu. And again, they both deny that specific request was made.
Yeah, and if he did say, don't sign a ceasefire deal, that is going to be a violation of the Logan Act, because that is a conflict between the United States and a foreign government that he is seemingly negotiating on and leveraging his power to negotiate on.
Whenever you get into the territory of X person is not allowed to say this, you have to clear a very, very, very high bar, because we have broad protections for people to say things even if we don't like what they're saying in this country. And I don't think this law is robust enough at all to support trying Trump in that way.
I'm going to be honest, I wouldn't be surprised if the justices Donald Trump handpicked to staff the Supreme Court sided with him if the Logan Act made it there. But it does seem like if he did this, if this conversation took place and he asked for what he's reported to have asked for, it violated the law. But I think what matters the most right now during an election season where Donald Trump is seeking the presidency is that on two occasions, on two of the top issues in the country right now, the war on Gaza and immigration at the southern border, that he prevented solutions from coming forth into fruition because they would personally not be good for him. This is someone who puts himself before the American people and has no interest in actually serving the people. And I think that's what matters here, and that's why this is becoming such a big story, regardless of if it's legal or not. Is it right or wrong? And I think many of the American people would say, this is wrong. We want a ceasefire. We want the fighting to end.
So I just want to bring up another example of the Logan Act being referred to as another example for why this is, I think, a very problematic law. So John Kerry, after he was Secretary of State, who's no longer Secretary of State, met with the Iranians in 2018 to keep the nuclear deal in play, despite all the chaos with the Trump administration. He was not allowed by, it was the Trump administration at the time. He had no formal power or role to negotiate with the Iranians, but he was just someone who had formerly been in our government and was trying to maintain friendly relations with them, despite Trump getting out of the nuclear deal. Now, Republicans at the time said exactly what you're saying. They said, oh, that violates the Logan Act. I similarly thought that was silly.
And so did Trump come out and say Kerry was never authorized to do that?
Well, he clearly was not authorized to do that. He was not acting on the behalf of the Trump administration.
You would be
he was
surprised.
Not part of the Trump administration.
We've had a lot of former people who have served overseas as ambassadors be authorized to negotiate, who are not currently serving in an official office or administration. So if Trump didn't
what do you
pursue
mean,
that...
authorized? Was he...
Yes, that means you get permission from the State Department or the president to go negotiate. And that's happened for a lot of people who are not serving in the government today and who are private citizens. But you have to have that authorization.
So people who are not confirmed by the Senate to be in a diplomatic role on behalf of the... Do you see how this starts to get a little slippery here? Who can and cannot meet with foreign leaders?
But if you have permission of the people serving in government to go off and negotiate,
well, John Kerry did not have permission.
You can't. That's the law.
Okay, but John Kerry did not have permission.
Do you know that?
And it was not a
for
violation
fact?
of the Logan Act? Yes, he did not have permission to do that. I mean,
Donald Trump
you're saying there was some deep... You're saying there might have been some secret, covert operation we're not aware of? That could be true of Donald Trump. Maybe Donald Trump was authorized to negotiate with Netanyahu on our behalf.
I don't know the legality of it. We don't know if Donald Trump authorized it.
I'm saying we do know the legality of it, which is that you have the First Amendment right to do this kind of thing.
We don't know if someone in the State Department said, yes, John Kerry, you can go and make sure the nuclear deal stays in place with Iran. That could have happened. It's happened in this administration where private citizens have negotiated on behalf of the government and have been empowered to do so.
The Republicans were empowered.
The point here
is
that Donald Trump is using a relationship with the right-wing leader of Israel. And he's using his relationship with the right-wing leader of Israel to do what? To go against
I'm
what
not arguing that it's good or
States.
not bad. I'm just saying
but you don't know that that was illegal or not. We don't know if Kerry was empowered by the State Department to go and do that, or if he had permission to
What I would say that in both cases, and basically every case this law has been invoked, is that it would be unconstitutional to use this law to stop them from doing what they were doing. But that's my view. Let us know what you think, and that does it for us today on Rising. It was great, of course, giving you all the news. Jess and I will be looking forward to, I will be looking forward to your reaction, so you're going to be on tonight.
I will be on tonight reacting to Tim Walz's speech.
I will be maybe going to bed a little earlier than I have been, but we will be both be reacting. I guess I shouldn't promise that. We're doing that, right, to Kamala Harris on Thursday? Are we doing that?
Yes, we are.
Oh boy. All right, much to come in this week still. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any of our content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, we're now available anywhere you can find podcasts. See you later.
Bye, y'all.